My father, John, was not easily shaken. He had served in the military, faced life-or-death situations, and made it back. To him, anything unexplainable was usually just a figment of a vivid imagination. However, there was one story he only ever told once, with a grave expression and clouded eyes. A story that haunted him for the rest of his life, about a horrific night at Solitude Bay. My dad was still young back then, he and two of his close friends. Mike and Tom decided to go on a weekend-long fishing trip. They chose a secluded spot on the western coast of Washington's Olympic Peninsula, a region famous for its ancient rainforests and forgotten coves. Solitude Bay was one of them. Accessible only by boat, the area felt like the last piece of true wilderness. There was no cell service, no roads, just trees, rocks, water, and an eerie silence. The trip started perfectly. The August sun was gentle. The water as still as a mirror. They caught a huge haul of salmon, enough for a big dinner. That afternoon, as they were getting ready to pack up, a thick layer of fog suddenly rolled in from the mountains, enveloping the entire bay. It wasn't like regular fog. It was dense, heavy, milky white, and almost tangible. Visibility quickly dropped to just a few feet. The compass on their boat spun erratically. They were trapped. "Damn it," Mike cursed. "We're not getting home tonight." Tom, quietest of the three, just stared into the fog with a worried look. "Don't say that, it's just fog." My dad, always the calm one, decided to anchor the boat and wait. "Don't worry, guys, we have enough food and fuel, it'll clear up." But the fog didn't clear. Instead, it grew even denser as the sun went down. In the darkness, the fog became mystical and terrifying. It swallowed the light from their headlamp, turning it into a weak, hopeless glow. After a few hours, anxiety started to creep in. All three of them had families waiting for them back home. The silence of the fog felt suffocating. My dad knew they had to do something. "We need to find a signal," my dad said. "Just a bar or two to call our wives and let them know we're okay." Mike hesitated. "Into the woods, in this fog. No other way," my dad insisted. "The boat's safely anchored here. We'll just go a short distance." "Tom, do you have the map?" They tied a rope to the boat's side to mark their way. Tom held the handheld compass, and my dad went first, with Mike following behind. Stepping into the forest, the suffocating feeling intensified. The smell of damp earth, moss, and decaying wood filled their nostrils. The light from their flashlights scattered, creating a hazy, ghostly space. They didn't speak. There was only the sound of their feet crunching on the leaf litter and the heavy sound of their own breathing. As they went deeper, my dad started to hear a strange sound. It wasn't the sound of birds or insects. It was a dry click, click, click. Like small stones hitting each other, forming a rhythm. At first, the sound was faint, easy to mistake for rustling leaves, but then it became clearer, almost like a kind of code. The sound repeated regularly, an unnatural beat. "Do you guys hear that?" my dad asked. Mike nodded, his face pale. Tom just shook his head, but my dad knew he had heard it too. The clicking seemed to come from different directions, surrounding them. It wasn't just a simple noise, but more like an arranged whisper, a mysterious message. They stopped, holding their breath to listen. The rhythm stopped. The forest was plunged into a frightening silence once more. And then the screaming started, a high-pitched, piercing, and desperate cry. It wasn't an animal, it was a person. The scream echoed through the forest, paralyzing their senses. My dad and Mike looked at each other, terrified. Tom turned around, trembling. "What was that?" Mike whispered. "Someone." My dad replied, his voice shaking. "Someone is out there." Just then the clicking started again, louder, faster, and closer. It was as if the scream had announced their presence. Immediately they felt it, an invisible presence, something watching them from the shadows, and then footsteps began to sound, not one or two, there were many. The rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, the sound of racing hearts. My dad knew they were being hunted. "Run," he yelled, "run." They turned and ran back towards the beach where the boat was anchored. The footsteps behind them became more chaotic, more frantic. My dad didn't dare look back. He just felt dark figures gliding between the trees, unnaturally fast. Unnatural sounds echoed in the night, like heavy breathing, the clicking, and indistinct whispers. Mike stumbled and fell. My dad and Tom immediately pulled him up. They kept running without stopping. Finally, they saw it. The faint light of the headlamp on the boat, only a few dozen feet away. They burst out of the trees, their feet landing on the sand and gravel. "Get on the boat," my dad yelled. Just then, a terrifying sound erupted. A tap, 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 like long, bony fingers hitting each other. My dad turned his head and saw them. They stood there at the edge of the forest, right at the boundary of the light. My dad couldn't describe what they were. They didn't look human. Their bodies were unnaturally tall and thin, with long, slender arms and legs. Their skin seemed to be a grayish green, blending with the color of the moss and the fog. They wore no clothes, but their bodies were covered in a layer of mud and moss. They wielded thin spears, their tips made of flint, which didn't look like human tools. "Oh my God," Mike choked out, his voice catching in his throat. The creatures stood motionless, staring at them. Their eyes were empty, lifeless, like a dead fish. My dad saw their long, sharp teeth. There was no screaming. No sound from them, they just stood there unnervingly still. Tom mumbled, his voice trembling. What are those?" My dad didn't know, he was terrified. His instincts told him these things weren't people, not a tribe, not hunters. They were something else. Something that had existed in this forest, something that had hunted in the darkness for centuries. My dad grabbed the flare gun. His hands were shaking, but he knew what he had to do. He aimed for the night sky. Loud bang rang out, and a bright red flare shot up, illuminating the entire forest. The strong, blinding light pulled back the curtain of fog, revealing hundreds, even thousands of figures standing there. They had no eyes, no mouths, yet they stared at them. Under the light of the flare, my dad could see their forms more clearly. They were not people, they were creatures, walking corpses. Wrinkled skin, long fingers, sharp teeth. They stood silently, not moving, like statues. The flare fell and the darkness swallowed them again. My dad and Tom pulled Mike onto the boat. They threw off the anchor and tried to start the engine. The engine wouldn't turn over. All three of them tried their hardest, but the motor just sputtered. My dad turned to look at the shore. He saw their empty eyes. They were still standing there, motionless. My dad tried with all his might in desperation, and finally the engine roared to life. They steered the boat out of the bay. And only when they were dozens of miles away from the shore did they feel safe. My dad never returned to Solitude Bay. He never told anyone what happened. The story haunted him for the rest of his life, about a terrifying night when he encountered the shadows. And though he never said it, I knew that story changed him forever. His name was Alex. At just 24 years old, he had a stable, peaceful life in a small town in rural New York. His greatest joy was fishing. Every weekend, he would drive his pickup truck a long distance to a small pond he called Darrell's Pond. It wasn't famous, wasn't even on the map, but it was his private paradise. The water was crystal clear, the fish were abundant, and most importantly, it was a place of absolute tranquility. One summer day, as the sun began to set and the heat subsided, Alex sat in his kayak, gently fishing in the middle of the pond. He had been there all day, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the soft plop of his lure hitting the water. It was an oddly peaceful feeling, but that peace didn't last long. Alex began to feel an unsettling presence. Turning his head, he saw an old, rickety boat silently gliding across the water. On the boat was an old man. Even in the fading light, he could see him clearly. The man wore an old jacket and a beanie that covered most of his face. His face was etched with deep wrinkles, and his eyes were cold and empty. He wasn't paddling in the usual way. He used a small oar to gently push against the water, causing the boat to glide without a sound. Alex felt uneasy. Darrell's Pond was his place. At least he always thought so. The presence of another person here shattered his tranquility. Moreover, the man's actions and appearance were very strange. He decided to pack up and leave. As Alex was reeling in his line, the old man's boat approached his. The man remained silent, just staring at him. The look in his eyes sent a shiver down Alex's spine. He tried to smile and said, "Evening, sir. I'm heading home." The man didn't reply. After a moment of silence, he tilted his head slightly. "No, you're not." Alex felt something was wrong. The man's voice was hoarse and deep, as if he hadn't spoken in a very long time. Alex turned, grabbed his car keys, and prepared to jump ashore. At that moment, the man spoke again, saying something that Alex would never forget. "You can't leave. I've been waiting for you for a very long time." He slightly bowed his head, and something shiny appeared from his jacket pocket. It was a handgun. Alex's hands began to shake. He didn't know what to do. The man didn't threaten him or raise the gun. He just exposed it. But the look in his eyes was full of death. Alex was no stranger to dangerous situations, but this time he was terrified. He couldn't stay and confront the man. He left everything on the boat, only grabbing his backpack, and jumped into the pond. The icy water jolted him awake. Alex swam frantically toward the shore, not daring to look back. He could still hear the sound of the man's boat silently gliding behind him. He felt his presence like a demon waiting. When he reached the shore, Alex ran into the woods, not daring to go back for his car. He just ran and ran, not daring to stop. The rustling sound behind him, the snapping of dry branches, it was all him. He ran until he saw the light of the road. Alex dashed out without looking for traffic. Luckily, no car was passing by. Alex ran home, his hands trembling as he unlocked the door. Once inside, he quickly locked all the doors, pulled down the blinds, and turned off all the lights. He sat in the darkness, panting. His heart was pounding in his chest. Alex had survived, but the horror was just beginning. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark, hugging his knees. He thought just one more night and this fear would disappear. But then a soft tap came from the living room window. Alex flinched, holding his breath to listen. The tap repeated, then a hoarse voice, the one that haunted him, spoke. "You can't run, Alex, I'm already here." It was his voice. Alex's body went stiff. He knew his name. He had followed him. How was that possible? Alex had never told him his name. He panicked. He crawled onto the floor, not daring to stand up. Alex grabbed his phone and called 911, his voice shaking. "There's a strange man outside my house. He has a gun. He knows my name." "Calm down," the dispatcher's voice tried to reassure Alex. "Can you provide your address?" Alex read his address in fear. He still lay there, listening to every sound. A moment later, he heard police sirens. He crawled out from under the bed, looked out the window, but saw nothing. The police arrived. They searched the area, shining flashlights into every bush. After a while, an officer came to his door. Alex opened it. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice still trembling. "We didn't find anything, sir," the officer said. "Maybe you were mistaken." Alex shook his head. "No, he was here. I heard his voice." The officer looked at him with pity. "All right, we'll patrol the area more frequently. If you see anything unusual, please call us." They left. Alex closed the door and a sense of emptiness washed over him. He no longer felt safe. His house, his sanctuary, was no longer a safe place. Fear had taken over his mind. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time there was a strange sound, his heart pounded. He always felt like someone was watching him. A month later, Alex decided to sell his house. He couldn't live there anymore. He moved to another city, starting a new life. He gave up his hobby of fishing. The haunting of Darrell's pond remained. Alex had given up the place he loved most, all because of a strange man. Even now, whenever he sees a pond or a lake, he remembers him, remembers his hoarse voice. He doesn't know who he was or what he wanted from him, but he knows one thing: he is still there, he is still waiting for him, and he will never be able to escape that haunting. The story has ended, but the fear remains. Alex doesn't know who the man was, but he knows that he is still watching him, waiting for the day he returns to Darrell's pond. In my 20 years of life, I've seen many strange things, but nothing was as terrifying as what happened that July night. It was a fishing trip with my brother-in-law Jack, my sister Sarah, and my two best friends, Mike and Emily. We rented a luxurious yacht in the Caribbean, a place with isolated islands as beautiful as paradise. My brother-in-law Jack, a successful and wealthy man, planned this trip. He wanted us to have a memorable journey, one that no one would ever forget, and indeed we never did. The first day at sea passed smoothly. We fished, swam, and enjoyed dinner on the yacht, but everything began to change as night fell. That night I was sleeping when I heard the sound of a boat engine. The sound was strange. It wasn't our engine. I went outside and saw Jack awake. "What's wrong?" I asked him. Jack pointed ahead. "There's a distress call from the sea. We have to help them." "Are you sure?" I asked. "The sea at night is very dangerous. We don't know who they are." "I know," Jack said, "but we can't just leave them." We rowed a small boat forward and found a broken-down skiff. On the boat were two strange men. "We're stranded," one of them said. "We ran out of gas." Jack and I helped them pull their boat onto our yacht. We gave them food, water, and some gas. We thought we were doing a good deed, but we were wrong as we were sleeping. I felt something was wrong. I woke up and saw our engine was running. I rushed out and saw the two strange men preparing to leave. "What are you doing?" I yelled. "Why are you taking our gas?" They didn't answer. One of the men pulled out a knife and threatened me. I was terrified, not knowing what to do. As I panicked, I heard Sarah scream. I turned and saw she had been attacked by one of the men. "Stop," I yelled. One of the men turned back and said, "Don't worry. We're just taking what we need." He held up a bag and I saw our wallets, keys, and reserve gas. He smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. They quickly left, leaving us in horror. We tried to call the police, but there was no phone signal. We were stranded. A few hours later, we finally found a signal and called the police. When the police arrived, they found our yacht, but the thieves had disappeared. A few weeks later, we returned home. I thought everything was over. But I was wrong. One evening, Jack called me. "They broke into my house," he said, his voice trembling. I immediately ran to Jack's house. The door was broken. Everything inside the house had been ransacked. Jack said the thieves had taken more things. "How could they get in?" I asked. "You had the door locked." "I don't know," Jack said. "Maybe they took your keys." We called the police and they found some fingerprints, but there was nothing to prove that the thieves were the strange men. A few weeks later, Jack installed security cameras. One night, the cameras recorded footage of two hooded men trying to break into his house again. They were the same people who had attacked us on the yacht. We finally had evidence, but they had disappeared. To this day, I still can't forget that horror. We escaped them, but we couldn't escape the fear. We always live in worry, afraid that they will return, and we never know who they are or what they want from us. My grandfather Samuel was a man of the sea and lakes. His life was measured by waves lapping against the shore, sunrises over still water, and the sound of a fishing line whistling through the air. He wasn't a man of many words, but one of action. His silence was as deep as the lakes he knew so well, and I, at 21, always admired his composure and experience. One early autumn morning in upstate New York, he asked me, "Are you ready for a real trip, Mark?" I had been fishing with him since I was a kid, but this was the first time he had used the word real. I knew it was an invitation to a special place, a place only he knew about. My curiosity was piqued. "Ready, Grandpa?" He just smiled, a rare and warm smile. We drove for hours past familiar paved roads, then turned onto a rough, rutted dirt trail. My grandpa's old pickup truck rattled and shook through thick bushes. Finally, we arrived at a small clearing where the road ended. In front of us was a lush green curtain of oak and pine trees. "This place is called Whispering Falls," he said, his voice deeper than usual. "It's not on any map. I found it when I was a kid, and I've never brought anyone here." We took our gear out, carrying our fishing rods, tackle boxes, and a small inflatable boat. As we walked through the forest, a strange sense of peace came over me. There were no chirping birds, no buzzing insects, just the sound of dry leaves under our feet and the gentle wind. When the forest gave way, I saw a beautiful lake appear. It was smaller than the lakes I was used to, but its water was crystal clear, a deep emerald green. I had seen many lakes, but this one had a pristine beauty, as if it had never been touched by humans. Ancient trees stood guard around it, their reflections mirroring on the still water. I took a deep breath. The air was fresh and damp, carrying the scent of earth and decaying wood. We inflated the boat and gently pushed it into the water. My grandpa paddled away from the shore to a secluded spot among the overhanging oak trees. "This is the best spot," he whispered, as if afraid to disturb the silence. We sat there fishing for a few hours. The sun rose higher, then began to set, painting a corner of the sky pink. Not a single fish bit, which was very strange for a seasoned angler like my grandpa, but he didn't seem disappointed. We just sat there enjoying the peace until it was broken. It was a very small sound, a plink from under the water. First, I thought it was a fish, but my grandpa changed. His face went from calm to tense. I saw his shoulders stiffen, his eyes fixed on the tip of his fishing rod. "What's wrong, Grandpa?" I asked, but he didn't answer. A moment later, something underwater pulled hard on his line. The rod bent powerfully, and my grandpa, a man who could always control everything, struggled to hold it. He didn't jerk the rod up as he usually would, but just tried to hold on. I saw his hands clench, his knuckles white. A feeling of unease rose within me. "This isn't a fish," he mumbled. "It's not a fish." His voice trembled. I looked down into the water. The water was clear, but I couldn't see anything. A heavy silence enveloped us, and then something appeared under the surface. I couldn't see it clearly, just a blurry shadow, but my grandpa saw it. His face turned white, his eyes wide with horror. He screamed a desperate scream, as if he were facing a nightmare. "A face, there's a face," he yelled. Then he threw the fishing rod into the water, stood up abruptly, and pushed the boat. "Row, row fast." I didn't know what was happening, but my grandpa's terror was contagious. I rowed frantically, not daring to look back. I heard the sound of water slapping behind us, and I knew it wasn't the sound of our boat. When we reached the shore, I jumped out of the boat, helping him onto land. He collapsed. Gasping for air, his face was still ghostly white. "What did you see?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Was it a big fish?" My grandpa shook his head, his eyes still wide. "No," he said, his voice trembling, "it wasn't a fish." He told me that as he struggled with the rod, he had looked down into the water. He had seen a human face. The eyes were empty, lifeless, staring at him. A hand reached out from under the water, not the hand of a fish, but a human hand. The hand grabbed his fishing rod, and he felt an unbelievable strength. It wasn't the strength of a fish, it was the strength of something dead. My grandpa, a man who was always calm and strong, trembled as he recounted the story. I don't know what he saw, but his words made me believe that he had faced a mysterious creature, something that wasn't a fish, something with a human-like form. Since that day, my grandpa never returned to Whispering Falls. I never went back either. The place that was once my paradise had become a hell. I still often dream of that face, the face that haunted my grandpa, the face that stole our peace. And I know one thing, that thing is still there, waiting for other anglers to come. A place where no one hears a cry for help, a place where fear sinks deep beneath the water. My name is Ben. At 28, I had a pretty stable and peaceful life. I lived in a small town in the northern United States, a place of majestic mountains and serene lakes. My greatest passion was kayaking and fishing. I always loved the feeling of being alone in nature, where the only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and my paddle stroking the water. One late autumn day, I decided to take a more adventurous trip than usual. I went to a swamp area near my town. This region was known for its wild, quiet beauty, but also for eerie stories and rumors about strange things living under the mud. Locals usually stayed away from this place, but I didn't. I was always curious about what they were so afraid of. I drove to the parking lot near the swamp, took my kayak off the car, and gently pushed it into the water. The air here was thick, carrying the smell of damp earth, moss, and decaying wood. The fog was dense, creating a hazy, mysterious landscape. I paddled away from the shore to a secluded spot among the overhanging oak trees. I was there all day with only the sound of the wind and my paddle stroking the water. I had caught a few fish and I felt very relaxed, but that peace didn't last long. As the sun began to set, an uneasy feeling came over me. I felt that something was wrong. I turned my head, and I saw something huge swimming toward me. It wasn't a log. It had a long head, cold eyes, and a large tail. It was an alligator, a giant alligator. I couldn't believe my eyes. Alligators don't live here. This area is not their natural habitat. I had read all the documents about the species of fish here, and none of them were alligators. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. The alligator swam closer to me. I could clearly see every scale, every tooth. It was bigger than any alligator I had ever seen on TV. I had a feeling that it wasn't a normal alligator. It had a terrifying appearance, as if it had lived for thousands of years under this swamp. I tried to paddle away, but my hands were shaking. The alligator swam faster. I heard the water slapping behind me, and I knew it was chasing me. I paddled frantically, not daring to look back. My heavy breathing mixed with the sound of the water. When I reached the shore, I jumped out of the kayak and ran into the woods. I didn't dare look back. I just ran and ran until I saw the light of the road. I darted out without looking for traffic. Luckily, no cars were passing by. I ran home, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door. Once inside, I quickly locked all the doors, pulled down the blinds, and turned off all the lights. I sat in the dark, panting. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had survived, but the horror was just beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that alligator, about its cold eyes. I felt something was wrong. That alligator was not a normal animal. It had a terrifying appearance, as if it had lived for thousands of years under this swamp. I tried to convince myself that it was just a dream, but I couldn't. I had seen it. I had felt the fear of it. I couldn't forget its cold eyes, the eyes that haunted me. I tried to search for information about alligators living in this area, but there was nothing. No species was an alligator. I asked the locals, but they just laughed and said it was just an eerie story, but I knew it wasn't a story. It was the truth. I gave up my hobby of fishing. I never returned to that swamp. The place that was once my paradise had become a hell. The haunting of that alligator remained, and I never knew what it was or what it wanted from me. Liam and Ethan, two childhood friends, shared a common passion: fishing. They were men of the 21st century, but their souls belonged to the wild. They were always looking for secluded lakes where humans had not yet set foot. This time they chose Loch Awe in Scotland, a place famous for its wild beauty and eerie stories. They arrived there late in the afternoon when the fog began to cover the lake. The air was thick, carrying the scent of damp earth, moss, and decaying wood. Liam, a practical person who didn't believe in ghost stories, said, "It's wonderful, not a soul in sight." Ethan, a more sensitive soul, said, "I don't know, Liam. This place has something strange." They got on their canoe, gently pushing it away from the shore. The surface of Loch Awe was as calm as a mirror, reflecting the blurry ancient trees. They paddled away from the shore to a secluded spot among the overhanging oak trees. They were there all afternoon, fishing and enjoying the silence. There was no chirping of birds, no sound of a boat engine, only them and the stillness. But that stillness didn't last long. As the sun began to set, a sound rang out. It was the sound of a taut fishing line, a powerful sound. Ethan, who was holding the fishing rod, was startled. "Liam, I think I caught a big fish." Liam rushed to help. The two of them struggled with the fishing rod. The strength of the fish was immense. As if it didn't want to leave this place, sweat beaded on their foreheads. Finally, they managed to pull the fish up. It was a large salmon, but not a normal salmon. It had something with it. They gently took the fish out of the water, and they saw something strange tied to its gills. It was an amulet. The amulet was made of a type of black wood with strange carvings on it. It looked very old, as if it had been under the water for thousands of years. Ethan took the amulet. "Liam, what is this?" Liam looked at the amulet, and a shiver ran down his spine. "I don't know, it looks very scary." "It's very old," Ethan said, his finger touching the strange carvings. "It has some kind of power." They argued for a while and finally decided to take the amulet with them. They didn't know that decision had changed their lives forever. When they put the amulet in their pocket, the air suddenly became colder. The fog grew denser, covering their canoe. An uneasy feeling came over them. Then Ethan pointed ahead. "Liam, do you see something?" Liam looked in the direction of Ethan's hand. They saw a ghostly figure on another canoe. It wasn't a normal canoe. It looked old, rotten, as if it had been submerged for a very long time. And on that canoe was a figure. A blurry figure with no face, no clear shape. It just stood there, motionless, staring at them. They were terrified. They knew it wasn't a normal person. It was something from another world. Liam quickly grabbed his camera and took a picture. That photo would be their only proof, but when he looked at the photo, he saw something even more horrifying. The figure wasn't there. The photo only showed their canoe. They paddled frantically. They didn't dare look back. They heard the sound of water lapping behind them, and they knew it wasn't the sound of their canoe. The sound of the water was strange, as if it wasn't made by a paddle. When they reached the shore, they jumped out of the canoe, leaving everything behind. They ran into the woods, not daring to look back. They just ran and ran until they saw the light of the road. They darted out without looking for traffic. Luckily, no cars were passing by. They ran home, their hands trembling as they unlocked the door. Once inside, they quickly locked all the doors, pulled down the blinds, and turned off all the lights. They sat in the dark, panting. Their hearts were pounding in their chests. They had survived, but the horror was just beginning. They tried to convince themselves that it was just a dream, but they couldn't. They had seen it. They had felt the fear of it. They couldn't forget its cold eyes, the eyes that haunted them. They tried to search for information about the creatures living in this area, but there was nothing. They asked the locals, but they just laughed and said it was just an eerie story. But they knew it wasn't a story, it was the truth. They gave up their hobby of fishing. They never returned to that swamp. The place that was once their paradise had become a hell. The haunting of that creature remained, and they never knew what it was or what it wanted from them. Daniel and Alex, two cousins who grew up together in a small Louisiana town where life moved as slowly as the Mississippi River and the air was thick with the scent of cypress and Spanish moss. Though they were different, Daniel was pragmatic, tough, and didn't believe in ghost stories, while Alex was sensitive and easily drawn to local legends. They shared a great passion, fishing. This passion often led them to remote, wild places in this time. Their destination was a secluded area of Bayou des Ombres, or Bayou of Shadows, as locals called it. It was a lazy Saturday afternoon. Their small fishing boat glided gently over the still water. Giant cypress trees with roots rising from the water like the gnarled fingers of giants, and strands of gray Spanish moss hung from the branches, creating an ancient, ghostly scene. The air was strangely silent, broken only by the sound of their paddles and the buzzing of mosquitoes. They had caught a few small fish and decided to stay a little longer to enjoy the quiet. As the sun went down, the last light of day disappeared. The forest grew dark and strange noises began to emanate from deep within the bayou. The croaking of frogs and the chirping of insects blended together into a wild symphony. Alex felt a sense of unease. "The air feels weird today, Daniel," he whispered. Daniel, busy retying his line, grumbled, "You're imagining things again, Alex. It's just the sounds of the bayou." But then a strange light appeared. It wasn't the light of a flashlight or a regular lantern. It was a pale yellow light hovering in the air, moving slowly and steadily. It flickered like a lost star in the night, and an odd feeling, both captivating and chilling, came over them. Daniel frowned. "What is that?" "Maybe someone's lost," Alex said, his voice trembling. They didn't know why, but a strong curiosity drew them toward the light. Maybe it was someone who needed help, or maybe it was just a natural phenomenon they had never seen before. They paddled toward the light. The lantern moved strangely, like a guide. It led them deeper into the bayou, through tangled turns, past cypress trees with roots growing on the water's surface, over rotten wooden bridges. The only sounds were their paddles stroking the water and their heavy breathing. As they went deeper into the bayou, a strange feeling came over them. The forest became more silent. There were no more birds chirping or insects buzzing. Just their own sounds. After about 20 minutes of paddling, the lantern finally stopped. It hovered right in front of a small, dilapidated, crooked shack built on a small patch of land. The trees around the shack were withered, and the air became unusually cold. "It's there," Alex whispered. Daniel looked at the shack, a sense of unease rising within him. "I don't think we should go in, Alex, but we've come so far. We have to see what's inside, don't we?" Alex said, his eyes full of curiosity. Daniel reluctantly nodded. He had a bad feeling, but he couldn't refuse. They tied the boat to a tree trunk and gently stepped ashore. The shack looked like it had been abandoned for a very long time, with rotten walls and a collapsed roof. There was no sign of life. They opened the door and a musty, rotten smell hit their noses. Inside, everything was empty except for a few strange objects: an old wooden chair, a table, and a wind chime. On the table there was an old book made of leather. The book looked very old and had some strange carvings on the cover. "What is this?" Alex asked. Daniel picked up the book, but he didn't dare to open it. A shiver ran down his spine. He felt that something was wrong. He felt that something was watching them. Suddenly the wind chime rang, but there was no wind. They were startled and turned around. They saw something standing in the corner of the room. Something taller than a normal person. It had the shape of a human, but no face. It was just a void, a completely empty head with no eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing at all. It was just an empty space. Their hearts pounded in their chests. Cold sweat beaded on their foreheads. They didn't know what to do. They just stood there staring at the void. "Run!" Daniel yelled. They rushed out of the shack, running like crazy. They didn't dare to look back. They just ran and ran until they reached the boat. They got in, frantically paddling away. Their heavy breathing mixed with the sound of their paddles stroking the water. They didn't know that something was following them. When they paddled out of the bayou, they turned around. The lantern was still there, hovering in the same spot, waiting. They never returned to that bayou again. They gave up their hobby of fishing. The haunting of the faceless thing remained, and they never knew what it was or why it was there. Maybe that thing was not just a monster, but a lost soul. Maybe the lantern was not a trap, but a warning. They survived, but they were changed forever. And they knew one thing. That thing is still there, waiting for other curious people to come. A place with no face, where fear sinks deep beneath the water. Jack, Mark, and I, Liam, had an annual tradition, our yearly night fishing trip to a secluded lake in East Texas. It's a wild, desolate area where ancient oaks and towering pines stretch toward the sky, and the air is always thick with the smell of damp earth and moss. We arrived on a lazy Saturday afternoon as the sun began to set. The air was strangely silent, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and our paddles stroking the water. We set up our tent, made a fire, and began fishing. Our conversation was just about jokes, childhood memories, and hopes for the future. Everything was perfect, a calm and relaxing night, but that peace didn't last long. When the clock struck 10 p.m., a strange howl echoed from deep within the woods. The howl was not like that of a wolf or a dog. It was a deep, low, and powerful sound, as if it came from something large and unexplainable. We looked at each other, sense of unease rising within us. "What was that?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. "Probably just a coyote," Jack said, but his voice wasn't very confident. The howl repeated, this time closer. Our hearts pounded in our chests. We no longer talked, just sat in silence, listening. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just a normal animal, but we knew that wasn't the truth. There was something very different about that howl. It was full of power, full of threat. As we were grilling sausages, a loud noise rang out behind us. Snap! A branch broke. All three of us flinched, quickly grabbing our flashlights. We shined our flashlights toward the sound, and we saw something unbelievable. A creature almost 10 feet tall, with dark fur, a wolf-like head, and eyes that glowed like red jewels. It stood there staring at us. It had a large, muscular body and long, sharp claws. We couldn't believe our eyes. We just stood there staring at it in horror. It growled, a deep, low, and powerful sound. It began to walk toward us, one slow, sure step at a time. "Run!" Jack yelled. We quickly ran to the boat, not daring to look back. We got into the boat, frantically paddling away from the shore, our heavy breathing mixed with the sound of our paddles stroking the water. When we got to the middle of the lake, we turned around. The creature was still standing there at the water's edge. Staring at us, it didn't chase us. It just stood there motionless. Its eyes were full of threat and evil. We felt like it was looking right through our souls. We paddled farther away until we could no longer see it. We just paddled and paddled until we reached the other side of the lake. We got ashore and didn't dare to go back. We just sat there in silence, panting. The next morning we went back. We wanted to make sure it was just a dream. But when we got there, we saw large footprints on the ground. The footprints had claws, and they were very big. Bigger than any animal we had ever known. We also saw claw marks on the tree trunks. The claw marks were very long and very deep. We knew that it wasn't a dream, it was the truth. It was a creature, an unexplainable creature. Mark, who had knowledge of eerie stories and local legends, said that it was a creature called a dogman. He said that it was a smart and evil creature, a creature that lived in wild places. We gave up our hobby of fishing. We never returned to that area again. The haunting of that creature remained, and we knew one thing. That thing is still there, waiting for other curious people to come. Years later, when my grandfather recounted this story, his voice still trembled, his eyes sparkling with an unconcealed fear. This wasn't his story, but his father's, a man he respected and loved his entire life. It was a story that changed his father's life, turning a brave man who loved nature into someone who lived in constant dread. My great-grandfather, a middle-aged man named Elias, was a seasoned night fisherman. He had a special love for the stillness of the night and the sound of water lapping against the boat. He often rowed his boat alone to secluded rivers, with only a hurricane lantern and a few fishing tools. Everyone in the village knew about his talent and courage. One late night, Elias decided to explore a little-known stretch of river, hidden deep in the dense forest. Everyone in the village avoided this place as they believed it was cursed. But Elias, with the confidence of a skilled fisherman, believed these were just tall tales. He was right. The river was full of fish, and he caught a few large ones in just a few minutes. He decided to move to another, quieter spot to focus on his hobby. However, that peace didn't last long. Every time he cast his line, a strange object would fall into the water, splashing water onto his face. At first, he thought it was just a large fish playing tricks. But when it happened repeatedly, he started to feel annoyed. He shined his lantern on the water, but saw nothing. There was only a small circle on the surface where the object had fallen. He continued to fish, but the feeling of being disturbed didn't leave him. Every time he cast his line, a plop sound would ring out and a few drops of water would splash onto his face. He felt like someone was teasing him, a frustrating and mysterious feeling. The silence of the night became heavy and scary. He started to feel a chill, a feeling he had never had before. He felt that something was not right. His patience had reached its limit. He gripped his fishing rod tightly, his voice tense. "Who's there? Stop it." He waited for an answer, but there was only silence. He cast his line again, and once more a strange object fell into the water, splashing water onto his face. This time his anger erupted. "You bastard, get out." "Get out now," he yelled, his voice echoing in the darkness. Right after his outburst, he heard a sound on the shore. Swish, the sound of leaves being trampled. He quickly shined his lantern towards the sound and he saw something. A girl with long black hair was holding an ancient lantern walking out from the bushes. She wore a white dress, but it was stained and dirty. She walked slowly and steadily as if in a trance. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't believe his eyes. He thought this girl was insane or trying to commit suicide. She walked straight into the river and slowly sank. Elias, a man with a kind heart, couldn't just stand and watch. He quickly left his fishing rod, jumped into the river to save her. The water was icy cold, but he didn't care. He just wanted to save that girl. He swam to where the girl had sunk, diving underwater, trying to find her. He dived again and again, but found nothing. The girl had disappeared. A feeling of helplessness and fear rose within him. He swam to the surface, gasping for air. He looked toward the shore and he saw his boat. And he saw the girl. The girl was sitting in his boat, the lantern still in her hand. She looked at him with empty eyes and a strange smile on her face. She didn't say anything, she just looked at him. Elias felt a chill, a feeling he had never had before. He couldn't understand. How could that girl be in his boat? The girl started to throw stones at him. Plop, plop, the small stones fell into the water, splashing water onto his face. Elias panicked. "Who are you?" "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice trembling. The girl replied, her voice shrill as if it came from another realm. "I'm here now, what are you gonna do to me?" Elias shined his lantern on the girl's face and he saw a horrifying sight. The girl's face was decaying and sagging. Her skin was pale and dark and one of her eyes was damaged. It was not the face of a living person, it was the face of a corpse. Elias screamed, a scream full of horror. He swam quickly toward the shore, not daring to look back. He swam as fast as he could, as if a monster was chasing him. When he reached the shore, he scrambled up, leaving his boat and all his fishing gear behind. He ran into the forest, not daring to look back. He ran and ran until he saw the light of a farmhouse. He ran out and collapsed from exhaustion. This story haunted Elias forever. He gave up his hobby of night fishing. He never returned to that part of the river again. Every time he looked at the water, he saw the face of that girl, and he heard her shrill voice. That fear had eaten deep into his soul, and it never left him. From then on, no one in the village dared to go near that part of the river anymore. They believed that the girl's soul was still there, waiting for other curious people to come. That place became a forbidden place, a place that everyone feared. And the story of Elias about the haunting under the river became a legend, a warning to those who don't believe in mysterious things. In a small town in rural Ohio, there was a man named David. He was 29, a young architect, and had a special passion for night fishing. For him, nothing could compare to the feeling of the stillness of the night, the fresh air, and the sound of fish biting on the water. His favorite place was a small, secluded lake, which locals called Lake Serenity, even though it was not as serene as its name. David arrived there on a Friday night. He came early, right after the sun set, and set up his camp on a small patch of land near the shore. The air that night was perfect, a light breeze, a full moon peeking through the clouds, and a sky full of stars. He quickly set up his tent, made a fire, and sat down, casting his fishing line. The chirping of insects, the croaking of frogs, and the rustling of the wind blended together, creating a wild symphony. David felt relaxed, completely immersed in this peaceful space. He sat there, silently staring at the water, waiting for a big fish to bite. Time passed slowly and David began to feel tired. He leaned against a tree, closing his eyes. He wasn't sleeping, but he was dozing off. It was around 1 a.m., and then it started. He felt a cold draft behind his back. It wasn't the wind. It was a cold feeling, as if someone was breathing on his neck. David flinched, opening his eyes. He turned his head, but saw nothing. There was only darkness and trees. He told himself it was just a gust of wind, and he closed his eyes again. A few minutes later, he felt it again. This time it was stronger. A cold draft, a feeling of being watched. He opened his eyes and once again saw nothing. He felt uneasy, a sense of dread rising within him. He tried to reassure himself that it was just his imagination. He closed his eyes again, but then he heard footsteps. Crackle, crackle. The footsteps were very light but clear. They came from behind him, from deep within the forest. His heart pounded in his chest. He quickly turned around, shining his flashlight toward the sound. His flashlight scanned through the trees and bushes, but saw nothing. The footsteps stopped when he shined the flashlight. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He turned back, trying to stay calm. He tried to convince himself that it was just an animal, a deer, a bear, or a fox. But the footsteps were too much like human footsteps. He sat there tense, he listened, nothing. He let out a sigh of relief. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was too tired and started to imagine strange things. He closed his eyes again. Crack! A loud noise rang out right behind him as if someone was stepping on dry branches. He flinched, jumping up. He shined his flashlight toward the noise, but saw nothing, only silence, a terrifying silence. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He knew something was wrong. He knew something was there, watching him. He felt like an invisible eye was looking right through his soul. He decided to leave. He quickly reeled in his line, put out the fire, and ran toward his car. He didn't dare to look back. He just ran and ran until he reached his car. He opened the door, got in, and locked the door. His heart was still pounding in his chest. He looked out the window but saw nothing. He started the car and drove away. He never returned to Lake Serenity at night again. That fear had eaten deep into his soul, and it never left him. A few days later, David felt a strange pull. He wanted to go back to Lake Serenity, but during the day, he wanted to face his fear, to find out the truth. He drove there on a Saturday afternoon. The area was crowded with people. People were fishing, playing with their children, and having a BBQ. There was nothing scary. It was just a normal lake where people came to relax. David sat down. Casting his fishing line, he looked at the people around him, and a sense of peace rose within him. He felt that maybe his fear was just a dream. Maybe it was just his imagination. He saw an old man sitting on a folding chair near an ancient tree. He had a face full of wrinkles and eyes full of wisdom. David decided to go near him and talk to him. "Hello," David said. "My name is David. I usually come here at night to fish, but I've never met you." The man smiled. "Hello, David. I'm Arthur. I've lived here all my life. I come here during the day, but I never come here at night." "Why?" David asked. Arthur looked at him with a look full of understanding. "Because this place is not for the living at night." David was startled. "You feel it too?" "I don't feel it, I know it," Arthur said. "This place is not a normal fishing spot. This place is a burial ground." David was stunned. A burial ground. "That's right," Arthur said. "Hundreds of years ago, this place was a burial ground for a Native American tribe. They didn't bury their dead like us. They had a custom called leaving the grave. After the deceased were buried, they would not be visited or worshipped anymore. They believed that the souls of the dead would be free, wandering everywhere. So what I heard," David whispered. "That's right," Arthur said. "Those are the wandering souls. They are not evil spirits. They are just lonely souls. They seek companionship. They want to play with you." David shivered. "So the footsteps, the cold wind, were from them?" "That's right," Arthur said. "They want to touch you. They want to talk to you. They just want you to know that they are there." David looked at the lake. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He no longer felt the peace. He only felt fear. His fear was not the fear of a monster, but the fear of something unexplainable, something invisible. A few weeks later, David gave up his hobby of night fishing. He sold all of his fishing gear. He never returned to Lake Serenity again. He knew that those souls were still there, waiting for other curious people to come. That place became a forbidden place, a place that everyone feared. And the story of David, about the fear from the past, became a warning to those who don't believe in mysterious things.